A thick blanket of fog clung to the Appalachian mountains, cloaking the early winter morning in a veil of gloom. The wind howled through the ridges, a cruel reminder of solitude. Claire Bennett, 30 years old, once a successful project manager in New York, now trembled as she stumbled barefoot along a muddy path covered in decaying leaves. Her feet were bleeding with every step, and the thin jacket clinging to her shoulders offered little protection from the cutting cold. Dry branches scratched at her arms, leaving bloody welts behind. Claire didn't know how long she had been walking, only that each breath carried the weight of despair. "Why, Ryan?" she whispered, her voice breaking in the wind. Just hours earlier, the man she had trusted, her fiancé, Ryan Carter, had pushed her out of his truck in the middle of this remote mountain wilderness. What was meant to be a romantic getaway had turned into a deadly trap. When Ryan discovered that Claire had lost her entire savings in a failed investment, the sweetness vanished from his tone. "You're worthless to me now," were his final words before he drove off into the fog. She had screamed, chased after him, hopelessly. No phone, no wallet, no ID, only cold, darkness, and betrayal eating away at her sanity. Far in the distance, the sky began to shift into the deep purple hue of dawn, but Claire had no strength left to admire its beauty. The wind lashed against her aching body, her vision blurred with tears and mist. She staggered forward, following the winding trail up the slope, each step a silent cry for help. What she didn't know was that beyond the dense line of trees, fate was quietly preparing to change everything. The cold grew more vicious as the sun began to rise. Claire collapsed for the third time, her knees scraped and bleeding, hands trembling as she clutched the trunk of a tree to stand. Her lips were pale, throat dry like she'd been swallowing sand. Hours had passed since she was left behind, and every minute felt like a slow sentence. "Is anyone there? Please?" Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. The wind swallowed it whole, scattering her plea into the wilderness. She dragged herself forward a few more feet before her body gave out completely. Collapsing onto the damp forest floor, her eyes stared blankly at the swaying branches overhead. The world began to spin. Somewhere between consciousness and collapse, she heard it. A faint metal clinking in the distance. A bell, then footsteps. Steady, strong. A figure emerged from the mist, a tall man in a heavy wool coat, carrying a wooden staff, followed by a few small cows lazily grazing in the background. He stopped the moment he saw her. "Oh God," he muttered, rushing toward her. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" Claire tried to speak, but only managed a weak moan. "Easy now," he said, his hazel eyes filled with concern. "I'm Ethan Walker. I live nearby. You're safe now." He gently draped his wool cloak over her shoulders, his large hands steady and warm against her trembling frame. With great care, Ethan helped her sit up, his arm wrapping around her like a shield against the cold. Claire was too weak to protest or question. All she knew was that after hours of freezing fear and hopelessness, she was finally touched by something she had nearly forgotten: human warmth. Beyond the ridge, a small wooden cabin appeared nestled among pine trees, simple but welcoming. Behind them, the cows followed silently, as if accustomed to these quiet rescues. Claire didn't know where she was going, but for the first time since she was abandoned, she was no longer afraid. The fire crackled gently in the small wood stove, casting warm shadows across the rustic cabin walls. Claire lay wrapped in a thick wool blanket on a simple bed, her body still trembling from cold and exhaustion. The room smelled faintly of pine wood, smoke, and something simmering on the stove. A soft voice came from the hallway. "Is she awake yet, Ethan?" Claire turned her head slowly and saw a short, stocky woman with chestnut hair in her 30s entering the room, holding a steaming bowl. "Hello, I'm Lena. I live here with Ethan. You're safe now." Claire nodded faintly, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Don't say anything," Lena said gently as she helped Claire sit up. "Here, have some soup. My homemade chicken broth can fix even the worst days." Claire took the spoon with trembling hands. Each warm bite seemed to melt the ice within her. A strange feeling surged up. Care. Unconditional, simple care. After hours of fear and pain, it nearly broke her. Ethan stood by the door, hands in his pockets, silently watching. When Claire met his eyes, she saw no curiosity, just presence. He wasn't pushing, wasn't prying. He was simply there. And that, somehow, was enough. A few hours later, when she had enough strength to sit up and Lena had returned to the kitchen, Ethan sat across from her with a mug of tea. "Do you feel like talking?" he asked gently. Claire hesitated, then nodded. And so she told him about her life in New York, the high-pressure job, Ryan, the man she once believed was the love of her life, about the failed investment that wiped out a decade of savings, and finally, about the trip that was supposed to be a proposal, but turned into an ambush, how he left her in the forest like broken furniture. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just listened, his eyes darkening when she described how Ryan had driven off, leaving her to freeze. "No one deserves that," he said, his voice low and steady. "And you don't have to face this alone." Claire looked at him, caught between skepticism and hope, but Ethan's quiet presence, unshaken, calm, without judgment, made her want to believe. "You can stay here as long as you need," he added, "until you're strong enough to face the world again." Claire didn't answer right away, but as she glanced around the room, the warm fire, Lena humming in the kitchen, and the quiet man across from her, she realized this just might be the place to begin again. A week had passed since Claire was rescued from the woods. She was recovering steadily, her wounds healing quickly thanks to Lena and Ethan's quiet care. It wasn't just Claire's body that was healing, her spirit was beginning to thaw as well. The nightmares still came some nights, waking her with a gasp and a cold sweat, but now she wasn't alone. Each time she jolted upright in the dark, the hallway light would flick on moments later, and Ethan's quiet footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor. He never asked much. He would just sit by the bed, sometimes handing her a warm cup of water, sometimes saying nothing at all. His presence alone was comfort enough. During the days, Claire began venturing out of her room. First just a few minutes on the porch, then longer walks with Lena to collect eggs or trips with Ethan to fetch water from the stream. Each day, Ethan would share a small story about an old cow named Maybelline who always grazed by the same rock, about how he and Lena once got lost in the woods as kids, or about a wild apple tree that bloomed out of season. Not every story had a moral, but his voice always carried warmth, like a world untouched by deceit. Claire couldn't remember the last time someone talked to her without expecting something in return. Every time Ethan smiled, not wide, but genuine, she felt something inside her soften. One morning, as she was hanging laundry in the backyard, Ethan approached and handed her a handkerchief. "You're lucky," he said with a teasing tone. "Early spring sunshine like this is rarer than gold." Claire looked at him and smiled, the first true smile in weeks. Ethan paused for a heartbeat, then looked away, as if afraid he might stare too long. Another day, when Lena came down with a cold and had to rest, Claire offered to make dinner. Ethan said nothing, just quietly fetched supplies, washed vegetables, lit the stove, as if they'd been doing this together for years. When the soup turned out too salty, they both laughed. "Guess I'm not used to mountain salt," Claire said. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe you're just not used to what home smells like." It wasn't grand gestures, but small ones that moved her. The way he listened, the way he didn't try to fix her, but made space for her healing. Each afternoon, after chores, they'd sit on the porch. Ethan mended bridles, Claire peeled apples. They talked about the smell of new wood, the scar on her wrist, or why the stray cat only ate when Lena wasn't looking. And sometimes they said nothing at all. But the silence wasn't heavy. It was gentle, like the wind whispering through leaves. Gradually, Claire realized this place wasn't just a temporary shelter anymore, and the man sitting across from her on the wooden bench, perhaps he wasn't just the one who saved her. One afternoon, while folding blankets in the living room, Claire accidentally knocked a book off the shelf, a photo slipped out from its pages. In it, Ethan stood, clean-shaven, in a suit, next to an older man at a formal ceremony. Below the frame read, Ethan Walker, valedictorian, Harvard Business School, 2012. Claire froze. She held the photo up to the light, her heart pounding. Ethan had never spoken of his past. She had assumed he was a reclusive rancher, not a Harvard graduate. Later that day, as Ethan returned from checking the electric fence, he found Claire sitting on the porch, holding the photograph. "Were you hiding this from me?" she asked, not accusing, but firm. Ethan looked at the picture, then sighed. "I wasn't hiding it, I just wasn't ready to tell." Claire said nothing. Ethan sat down beside her, eyes steady and open. "I was born into wealth," he began. "My father was CEO of Walker Construction. You might have heard of it." Claire nodded. Even in New York, that name was familiar. "He believed money could buy anything. I spent my life in boardrooms and fundraisers, studying things I didn't care about, becoming the man he wanted. I graduated Harvard poised to inherit it all. Then my mother died, suddenly, and in her final days, she asked me, 'You have everything, but are you happy?'" Ethan paused, his voice softer. "I didn't have an answer. After her funeral, I walked away, sold my shares, used part of it to start an education foundation in her name. The rest, I built this ranch. I chose a life that felt honest." Claire listened, emotions rising. Surprise, yes, but also something deeper. She understood loss. She understood what it meant to feel trapped in a life that didn't belong to you. "And Lena?" "Lena is the daughter of the housekeeper who raised me. She's the only real family I have. I chose her as my sister." Claire looked around. The modest furniture, the worn kitchen table, the ever-burning stove. There was no pretense here. Ethan didn't live like this to hide. He lived this way to return to who he truly was. "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me this," Claire said, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "It's not because I trust you," Ethan said, offering a small smile. "It's because I want you to know who I am. Really am. Not the guy with a staff and a herd of cows, not the heir to some dynasty, just me." Claire sat in silence for a moment. Something inside her shifted, a quiet, growing belief, soft but certain, had begun to take root. 2 days after their conversation about the past, Claire and Ethan drove down to the town to meet with the local sheriff. Ethan had called ahead to set an appointment. On the way there, Claire sat in silence, watching the mountains recede in the truck's side mirror, like the past fading behind her. At the station, Sheriff Mitchell, a man in his 50s with a calm voice and sharp eyes, listened to Claire's story without interrupting. She recounted everything: Ryan, the manipulated investment, the drive into the wilderness, the abandonment. Her hands trembled in her lap, but this time she wasn't alone. Ethan sat beside her, steady and silent, a pillar holding up the roof after a long, violent storm. "Ryan Carter," Sheriff Mitchell repeated. "We've heard that name before. 2 other women have come forward with similar stories, but there wasn't enough proof." Claire looked up, a mix of shock and anger in her eyes. "But with your statement, and if we can verify the withdrawals and asset transfers under your name, we might finally have enough," he added. On the ride back, Claire couldn't relax. She knew this was just the beginning of a battle, not just legal, but emotional. "I'm scared, Ethan," she said softly. "I'm scared he'll find a way out." Ethan reached over, placing a hand over hers. "He won't, Claire. I've already contacted my mother's foundation attorney, and I promise you're not facing this alone." The next day, Claire was taken to a private clinic funded by Ethan's foundation. The doctor, an old friend of Ethan's, confirmed she was suffering from physical exhaustion and signs of post-traumatic stress. "We'll help you recover, physically and mentally," the doctor assured gently. 3 weeks later, Ryan was arrested at a hotel in Atlanta, caught attempting to charm another woman under a false identity. Authorities confirmed he would be charged with fraud, reckless endangerment, and the newest charge, attempted extortion. When the call came in, Claire sat silently in the cozy kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. For the first time, she didn't cry, didn't shake, just a light emptiness in her chest and a feeling like she'd finally taken off the armor she'd worn for far too long. "I thought I'd feel satisfied," she told Ethan. "And you don't?" "No, I feel free." Ethan smiled. "That's what real justice feels like." The call came on a cloudy morning. Claire was making coffee when her phone buzzed, an unknown number from Georgia. She hesitated, then picked up. "Miss Bennett," a woman's voice said. "I'm the head nurse at Atlanta Federal Security Hospital. I'm calling on behalf of Ryan Carter." Claire froze. What? What happened? "He attempted suicide in custody, slashed his wrists. Luckily, he was found in time. He's alive and asking to see you." Claire gripped the phone tighter, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over her. Anger, disgust, then, unexpectedly, pity. That afternoon, she sat with Ethan in the kitchen, hands trembling around her mug. "I'm not sure if I should go," she whispered. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Ethan said. "But if it helps you close that door, I'll be right there with you." 2 days later, they arrived at the hospital. Ryan lay in bed, pale and hollow-eyed. Bandages wrapped his wrists. His gaze was sunken, as though time itself had carved him out. "Clear," he rasped. She stood still, looking at the man who once left her for dead. Now, he was a shell of that cruelty. "I'm not here for you," she said calmly. "I'm here to forgive, not because you deserve it, but because I need to be free." Ryan closed his eyes. A single tear escaped. "I did something unforgivable. I lost everything." "No," she said. "You haven't lost the chance to make it right. Don't waste it." Ethan entered then, stepping beside Claire. Ryan looked at him, recognition dawning. Bitterness flickered, then faded. In its place, quiet resignation. "Thank you," Ryan said softly. "For doing what I should have done." Ethan said nothing. He simply laid a steady hand on Claire's shoulder, a silent seal of truth. On the way home, Claire said little, but the tension in her eyes was gone, replaced by calm. As the truck turned down the familiar path toward the ranch, she looked at Ethan. "I'm ready now." "Ready for what?" "For what's next. No more looking back." Ethan smiled. "I've been waiting for you, right here, long before you arrived." Mountain life had quietly become Claire's new rhythm. She no longer counted the days since she'd been left behind. The nightmares faded. Now her mornings were filled with roosters crowing, Lena's strong coffee, and the misty serenity stretching beyond the porch. Claire began working alongside Ethan in the foundation, not as someone being helped, but as a true partner. With her background in project management from New York, she helped reorganize financial records, propose new communication strategies for the rural schools they supported. Ethan was impressed by her insight. Lena just smiled and said, "Told you she wasn't just a pretty face." Though she hadn't said it out loud, Claire knew in her heart she didn't want to leave. One evening, after dinner, while Lena was cleaning up, Ethan invited Claire out to the porch. "There's something I want to ask you," he said, eyes on the starlit sky. "What do you plan to do next?" Claire hesitated. I want to stay, at least for a while." Ethan nodded, asking no more. "And if I want to work for your foundation?" she added. "Officially, with a contract, responsibilities, everything." "You just hired yourself," Ethan smiled. They both laughed, softly, without need for more words. A week later, Ethan took Claire on a hike to a northern ridge above the ranch. They walked for nearly an hour, passing flaming red maples and quiet brooks. When they reached the summit, Claire stopped in awe. The valley opened wide before them, bathed in golden sunset. Tall grass swayed in the breeze under a crystal sky. "This is my favorite place," Ethan said. "My mom brought me here when I was a kid. She told me if you ever feel lost, come back here." Claire stood beside him, saying nothing. The wind tugged gently at her hair. the evening light bathing her skin in gold. "Claire," Ethan said softly. She turned, meeting his gaze. Open, now, unguarded. "I've never felt like this before, but I don't want to rush you. I know you still need time." Claire didn't reply. She took a step closer, her fingers brushing his. "I'm not ready to name this either, but I don't want it to disappear." Ethan took her hand. This time, neither needed to say anything more. That evening, as they returned to the cabin, Lena looked at them and simply said, "Finally." Over dinner, they talked about launching a new school project in the region. Claire realized that, for the first time in years, she was contributing to something that truly mattered. Before bed, she stood on the porch for a while, staring up at the night sky. A shooting star streaked overhead. "Let me begin again," she whispered. And the star, like a promise, kept moving. A month later, Claire had fully settled into mountain life. Each day began with the sound of cattle rustling, the scent of Lena's fresh bread, and a stack of project plans on her desk. But amidst all the bustle, one thing remained constant: the quiet sense of peace that wove itself into everything. That afternoon, as the sun bathed the hills in golden light, Claire stood by the wooden fence, watching Ethan lead the cattle home. His movements were calm, deliberate, just like the way he had entered her life, silently but undeniably. "Will you always choose to live this way?" she asked as he approached. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What way?" "Simple, humble, without needing to prove anything." He smiled. "I don't need to prove. I just need to live honestly, and I think I wouldn't want this life without you in it." Claire looked up, surprised, not by the words, but by how long she had quietly waited for them. Her answer had been ready for a while. "Then, let's just live like this," she said, placing her hand over his. That night, Lena baked apple pie and made hot cocoa. The three of them sat by the fire, sketching out plans for the new year, opening another classroom, organizing a summer camp for local kids, building a tiny library. Claire took notes, carefully, while Ethan doodled clumsy drawings in the margins. No wine, no gowns, just laughter, crackling firewood, and quiet dreams. But never had Claire felt more complete. Later, as the night grew quiet, Claire and Ethan sat outside on the porch. The moon laid a silver sheen over the rooftop, and the forest whispered like a lullaby. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, eyes fixed on the valley. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. "Deeply, but not because I'm loved." "And why?" "Because I finally learned to love myself and to forgive." Ethan said nothing. He just held her hand a little tighter. And there, in the heart of the mountains, no vows were spoken. Because sometimes, love doesn't need to be declared. It just needs to be lived, quietly, simply. That afternoon, as the golden light spilled over the fields, Ethan led Claire to a quiet clearing behind the hills, a meadow scattered with wild lavender, where birds sang as if composing a private symphony. Claire turned, her hair catching the breeze. "This place, it's unreal." "It was my mother's favorite spot," Ethan said gently. "She told me, if you ever truly love someone, bring them here, speak your heart." Claire looked at him. Ethan knelt, not with a velvet box, not with diamonds, but with a thin silver ring etched inside with the words, "Simply us." Claire Bennett. His voice was steady, honest. "You don't have to be anyone else with me. I don't offer riches, only a real life with you. One day at a time, will you give me the honor of walking that path together?" Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile broke through. "You really are one of a kind." "I don't need to be anything else," Ethan replied. "I just need to be yours." She nodded, falling into his arms. No fireworks, no cheers, just wind, wild flowers, and two hearts finally aligned. They sat there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, as the golden light faded behind the trees. In the days that followed, something new began to bloom, not just between them, but within Claire herself. Weeks later, Claire began to notice changes in her body. At first, she brushed it off as exhaustion, but Lena, always intuitive, raised an eyebrow and said, "You should take a test." Claire didn't argue. The result stopped her cold. 2 bright lines. She sat on the porch floor, staring into the horizon, pregnancy test still in hand. Ethan found her at sunset. "You okay?" Claire held out the test. "I think I'm pregnant." He froze, then smiled, not wildly, but deeply, steadily. "Then we're not just starting a new life, we're starting a family." The wedding took place in a small hilltop chapel, surrounded by pine trees and open grass. Claire wore a simple lace dress sent by her mother from New York, long-sleeved, warm. Ethan wore a white shirt and a clay-colored vest. No pews, no aisle runner, just wooden chairs, Lena's handmade candles, wild flowers from Claire's garden, and the smiles of people who truly loved them. When the minister began, "Do you take?" Claire didn't wait. She nodded, eyes shining. Ethan laughed. "She always knows what she wants." The chapel burst into laughter. Life after was slow and beautiful. Claire's belly grew, but she never stopped working for the foundation now from the porch, planning mobile schools and vocational training for rural women. Ethan worked with the cattle, met with local groups, but always returned before sunset with a small bouquet, a new story, or simply an embrace. Some evenings, the 3 of them, Ethan, Claire, and their unborn child, lay on the rug, listening to the crackling fire, reading aloud. Claire often placed a hand on her belly and whispered, "Are you listening, little one? This is how your father loves, with presents every single day." On a spring night, Claire stood on the porch, one hand on her belly, looking at the star-filled Appalachian sky. She thought of the road she'd walked, from a woman left to die in the woods, to a mother, a wife, a woman fully alive. Not in New York, not in glass towers or million-dollar deals, but here, in nature, in a love that asked for nothing and gave everything. And in that moment she knew the life she almost lost had never truly begun until she stopped chasing perfection and started choosing peace. "Happiness," she whispered, "isn't something we chase. It's something we build with truth and care." Ethan stepped out, gently draping a shawl over her shoulders. "It's still chilly," he said. "I just want to feel all of this," she replied. He didn't speak. He just held her hand. And together, they stood in the quiet, no vows needed, no past or future pressing in, for only now, simple, hold.